When a man saves a drowning eagle from a lake, he spends months nursing it back to health before releasing it back into the wild. How the eagle later thanks him for his help is unbelievable. The man sat down on the bench, taking in the natural beauty of his surroundings. He'd become a regular visitor to this spot ever since he'd first rescued the eagle. Part of him always hoped that he'd see the magnificent bird again, but so far he hadn't been lucky. Fishermen were a regular sight out on the lake, and he believed that the eagle wouldn't make an appearance as long as the area was so filled with people. But the lake was a tranquil body of water with an abundance of fish, and it was easy to see how people could spend hours here. The fisherman who had first spotted the eagle was there as well. He still went on about his days as usual, but now he kept a watchful eye on his surroundings, ready to jump in again if need arose. That day, the fisherman had been lost in his thoughts when he noticed an eagle fall into the water. He'd seen a lot of wildlife during his many years spent by the lake and assumed that the bird had just gotten overly tired from flying. Once the eagle had rested, it would be off again, or so he thought. The next day, the man was still thinking about the bird he had seen plummet from the sky. It occurred to him that he'd never once seen an eagle fall into the lake, and most importantly, that he hadn't seen it get out of the water. So, he decided to head back to the spot, just to be sure that the bird had recovered and flown away. Sadly though, the bird was still in the water. It was thrashing and squeaking, but its movements were becoming sloppier and its cries softer. Now, the fisherman knew for certain that something was wrong. He tried to get closer to the bird in the hopes of helping it out of the water, but as he approached, the distressed eagle began to panic. It was frantically trying to get out of the water, but its feathers were completely damp and too heavy to let it soar. It was clear that it wasn't going to be able to fly anytime soon, and the fisherman knew he needed to get help. He contacted a local bird rescue center and explained the situation. Soon enough, a van pulled up by the lake, and one of the staff members from the rescue center came over with a net. At the sight of another human, the eagle began to panic once again. This time, it exhausted itself with its efforts, and it became apparent that the bird was close to drowning. Without another thought, the man from the rescue center cast his net into the water and scooped up the eagle. Once it was on dry land, the man picked up the eagle from the net and had a feel of its wings. He was pretty sure it had a fracture, which would explain why it hadn't just flown out of the lake, but he decided to take the bird back to the rescue center where he would be able to do an X-ray and fully assess the situation. Although the golden eagle was a fully grown male, the man was able to hold it in his arms. He had now stopped struggling, perhaps because he had sensed that the man was only trying to help. He placed the eagle in a large cage in the back of the van and gave it a warm blanket to lay on. After days in the cold lake, the poor thing needed some warmth and comfort. Back at the rescue center, the man carried out further tests on the injured eagle, but the news was much worse than he'd originally thought. The bird had completely shattered its left wing. If he ever stood a chance of flying again, he would need lots of care and attention. The rescue center was currently almost at capacity, and the man would need to put in a lot of extra hours to look after the eagle, but he wasn't about to turn the injured creature away. Without round-the-clock care, the bird may never be able to return to the wild. But the man's worries weren't over yet. It still wasn't known where the eagle had fallen from, and now the man began to fear that he could have fallen from a nest. In the wild, male eagles are responsible for hunting for food to feed chicks. If he had indeed fallen from a nest, then there was a real possibility that there were some eagle chicks somewhere without food. The man returned to the spot by the lake where he'd rescued the male eagle and began to look for signs of a nest. Sure enough, he soon spotted one. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, so he decided to wait and see if another adult eagle approached it. The man carried out his observations for a few days, but no other bird came close to the nest. The man connected the dots and concluded that the male eagle in his care had more than likely fallen from the nest he was now observing. To make matters worse, if there were chicks in the nest, then they had also been abandoned by their mother. The situation was much worse than he'd thought. With the nest being up so high, the man had no choice but to call the emergency services to come and check out the nest. When the rescue team showed up, they climbed up to the nest and confirmed that 2 small eagle chicks were living there. They carefully placed the chicks in a bag and took them back down to the man, who transported them back to the rescue center. Once the man could get a better look at the chicks, he concluded that they weren't in a very good state. They had likely been left without food and warmth for days now. Given the size of the chicks and the fact that they still had fluffy feathers, the man guessed that they couldn't be any older than 1 month. Now, the man found himself responsible for the father and his 2 chicks. Luckily, with plenty of food and some close monitoring, the baby eagles soon got stronger. Their health wasn't nearly as bad as that of their father. The male eagle was still weak, and his wing would need weeks, if not months, to properly heal. The chicks still weren't big enough to look after themselves, and in the absence of both parents, they would never survive in the wild. It was up to the man to show them how to feed themselves, how to hunt, and how to fly. He set up constructing nests in elevated locations to replicate their wild habitat. Each night, the man would leave a variety of food in one of the nests so the chicks could practice feeding themselves. When they'd mastered that skill, it was time to learn how to hunt and fly. All of their downy feathers had now gone, and the man knew that in the wild, the chicks would now be flying to and from their nest independently. So he placed plenty of fish in the ponds around the center to encourage the 2 eagle chicks to fly from their nest. Soon, his plan worked. Each morning, there would be evidence that the chicks had flown from the nest and gone hunting for fish. 2 weeks later, he realized that they were now ready to be set free. Although the male eagle was growing stronger, he still wasn't ready to leave the rescue center. He was moved to a larger outdoor enclosure where he would begin to build up his wing strength again. The new enclosure also had the added benefit that the eagle could now watch his offspring practicing their flying skills. The man would often see the male eagle watching the chicks flying around with pride in his eyes. The 2 eagle chicks were fitted with identity tags so they could easily be tracked once they returned to the wild. On a clear, sunny day, the man loaded the 2 eagles into his van and returned to the lake. When he opened the cages, they soared into the sky and glided high above the lake. The man smiled at the thought that he'd been able to help the 2 chicks who had been close to starving to death regain their freedom. Now, he just needed to get the male eagle back into the wild. Just weeks after the eagle chicks had left the rescue center, the father had finally regained enough strength in his wing to be released. The man attached an identity tag to the eagle's leg, the same way as he'd done with the chicks, and once again returned to the lake. The male eagle didn't seem quite as keen to leave his cage, though. When the man opened the door, the eagle just stood there looking around, as though he didn't quite trust himself enough to fly off. The man was confident that the wing was now fully healed, but he understood the bird's hesitation. He just needed to regain some courage. After a few moments, the eagle hopped out of the cage and then finally took to the sky. The man watched as the eagle climbed higher and then glided over the lake, circling high above the man's head. It was another job well done, and seeing all 3 eagles return to the wild was all the thanks the man needed. Birds of prey are not domesticated animals, and even when they are hand-reared by people, they struggle to make long-lasting connections. They are solitary creatures and value their freedom and independence more than anything else. So the man knew that even if he saw any of the 3 eagles again, they wouldn't spare him a single look. Still, the lake became a regular walking spot for him. Not only was it a very beautiful location, but he also harbored a hope to see the eagles one more time. He'd spent months nursing them back to health, and he would love to know that they were getting on fine in the wild. That day, he'd been walking for quite a long time, so when he spotted a bench by the edge of the lake, the man took the opportunity to have a quick rest and admire the scenery. He was deep in thought as he looked at the reflections dancing across the lake when a scratching sound to his left pulled him out of his thoughts. Turning around, he spotted 3 eagles on a nearby rock. He noticed that all 3 birds had identity tags on their legs. He didn't want to get too excited at the thought of all 3 eagles he'd rescued landing so close to him, but he couldn't deny that his heart was beating faster. There were plenty of rescue birds in the area, but he couldn't shake the thought that those were the same eagles he had brought back to life. The sight felt like a dream. He had hoped to be able to see even just one of them from a distance, and yet now, all 3 of them were standing right in front of him, so close he could tell them apart. He slowly stood up and began to walk closer to the birds, hoping to see the identity tags more clearly. He'd expected them to fly away when he got near them, but all 3 remained on the rock. Soon, he was close enough to read the identity tags. Unbelievably, the 3 eagles were indeed the father and the 2 daughters he'd rescued. The two females were more than old enough to live independently now, so he couldn't believe they'd all landed in front of him as a family. It was like they were saying hello, and even though the situation was unbelievable enough, the man was sure they bowed their heads a little when he waved at them. In the following months, the young eagle's tracking tags informed the man that they were doing well and adapting to their natural habitat. However, he never saw them again. Surprisingly, the male eagle became a frequent visitor to the rock during the man's walks. As the man and the eagle shared silent moments overlooking the lake, he couldn't help but feel a connection to the majestic bird. He never tried to ruffle his feathers, of course, but he could tell that the eagle felt comfortable enough in his presence to come close. And when he looked into his eyes, he always felt like the bird was trying to convey all his appreciation for his help. Now it's over to you. How would you have felt seeing all three eagles again? Do you think they were really thanking him for his help? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.